Every zoo in the world operates on the same fundamental promise. The animal is in there. You are out here. The barrier between you is sufficient. That promise is built into the entrance fee. It is built into the signage. It is built into the architecture, the moats, the walls, the sliding gates and the keeper corridors and the double door systems. Every element of the physical design is an institutional declaration. We have thought about what this animal is capable of, and we have built something that accounts for it. 6 stories in this video have one thing in common. In every single one, the institution had already received the information. Not a theory, not a worst-case projection. The information, in a safety committee minute, in a court-tested OSHA finding, in an inspection report, in the record of a prior attack by the same animal, that the barrier was not sufficient, that someone was going to get hurt, that the system, as designed, would eventually fail. In every single one, the institution made a decision, not a mistake, a decision. And in every single one, that decision had consequences. A 4-year-old tiger in San Francisco whose enclosure wall was 4 feet too short. A killer whale purchased from a Canadian facility after he drowned a trainer because his genetics were too valuable to lose. A 2-year-old boy and a wild dog exhibit whose own safety committee had spent 6 years documenting the danger. A zoo with no firearms and a single-point safety system that a coroner would later describe as requiring only 1 human error to become fatal. 6 animals, 6 institutions. The paperwork was there before anyone died. This is Abandoned Thrills. Don't forget to subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's begin. The first thing the San Francisco Zoo said in the immediate aftermath was that the wall was 20 feet high. It wasn't. It was 12.5. That specific lie, and it was a lie, not an error, because the zoo's own director acknowledged the real measurement 2 days later, is the detail that frames everything else about what happened at the San Francisco Zoo on Christmas Day 2007. Because the first thing an institution does when something goes wrong is reach for a number that protects it. And the number the San Francisco Zoo reached for, 20 feet, happened to be exactly the figure that would have meant the enclosure was safe. 12.5 feet was not safe. The Association of Zoos and Aquariums had published a minimum recommended height of 16.4 feet for tiger enclosures. The San Francisco Zoo's Tiger Grotto had been constructed in the 1930s and had not been substantively redesigned since 1940. The zoo knew the wall's actual height. The AZA had inspected in 2004 and said nothing about it. The tiger's name was Tatiana. She was a 4-year-old Siberian tigress, approximately 300 pounds, transferred to San Francisco from the Denver Zoo. On December 22, 2006, 3 days before Christmas, zookeeper Lori Comajon was feeding Tatiana through the feeding grill when the tiger grabbed her right arm, pulled it through the bars, and bit it. The injury required multiple surgeries and skin grafts, permanent nerve damage. Lori Comajon's arm was severely and lastingly impaired. The California Occupational Safety and Health Administration investigated. They found inadequate safety precautions. They found insufficient staff training. They issued a fine of $18,000 and cited specific deficiencies in how the zoo was managing its tiger enclosure. The tiger cage was then remodeled. It reopened in September 2007. 3 months later, Tatiana was out of it. Shortly after closing time on Christmas Day 2007, 3 young men, Carlos Sousa Jr., 17, and brothers Colbert and Paul Dhaliwal, aged 23 and 19, were at the tiger enclosure. Witnesses would later describe the group taunting animals. Toxicology would later confirm elevated blood alcohol in both Dhaliwal brothers. Evidence at the scene, pine cones and sticks in the enclosure vicinity, a shoe and blood found near the moat edge, led investigators to conclude that Tatiana had been provoked and that at least one of the group may have dangled a limb over the viewing rail. What is documented without dispute is what happened next. Tatiana scaled a 12.5-foot concrete wall. She cleared a moat 33 feet wide. She emerged into the zoo grounds and attacked all three men. Kulbir Dhaliwal was the first victim, mauled near the enclosure. Carlos Sousa, according to accounts from his father and from police, did not run. He tried to distract the tiger, to pull its attention away from Kulbir. He yelled. He tried to help his friend. Tatiana killed him. Sousa was found near the tiger grotto with blunt force injuries to his head and neck, skull and spinal fractures, a severed jugular vein, and more than 40 puncture and scratch wounds. He was 17 years old. Tatiana then followed a trail of blood left by Kulbir Dhaliwal 300 yards across the zoo grounds to the Terrace Cafe, where both brothers had taken cover. She was still attacking when armed officers arrived. When the victim inside the cafe cried out, "Help me! Help me!" the tiger resumed its assault on him. The officers used their patrol car lights to draw it toward them and shot it dead. The Association of Zoos and Aquariums said this was the first time a visitor had been killed by an escaped animal at a member zoo since the organization's founding in 1924. The Dhaliwal brothers settled their lawsuit against the zoo for $900,000. The Sousa family settled on undisclosed terms. The wall at the San Francisco Zoo's tiger enclosure is now 16 feet 4 inches, with an additional transparent barrier bringing the total to 19 feet. An electric wire runs along the inside of the habitat. The moat retains water. The 1930s grotto ran for 67 years without being measured against the standards that existed for it. After OSHA cited the zoo in 2006 for specific deficiencies in the tiger enclosure following Tatiana's attack on Lori Komajan, the remodel addressed some things. It did not address the wall height. Zoo director Manuel Molinedo, when asked whether Tatiana had shown warning signs before Christmas Day, she seemed to be very well adjusted into that exhibit. The same animal, 1 year later, in the same enclosure, with the same wall. She had already told them what she was capable of. Before Tilikum killed anyone at SeaWorld, he killed someone else. And the people who bought him knew. Kelty Byrne was 20 years old. She was an environmental studies student at the University of Victoria, a competitive swimmer, and a part-time trainer at Sealand of the Pacific, a small marine park at the Oak Bay Marina in Victoria, British Columbia. She had been working there to earn extra money while studying. She liked animals. She had been around them her whole life. On February 20th, 1991, Kelty Byrne was working poolside at the orca enclosure when she slipped and fell into the water. Sealand of the Pacific kept 3 orcas, 2 females, Nutka IV and Haida II, and a young male captured from Icelandic waters in 1983 at approximately 2 years old. His name was Tilikum. The dynamics between the 3 animals were not good. The 2 females were dominant and regularly aggressive toward Tilikum. He was frequently bullied into the medical pool, a space barely larger than his body, for protection. The trainers at Sealand worked with these animals in a facility that, by any modern standard, placed them in conditions of extraordinary stress. What witnesses described over the following minutes is documented in the coroner's inquest. All 3 whales responded to Kelty Byrne's presence in the water. They did not allow her to exit. For approximately 10 minutes, they batted her around the pool, dragged her underwater, surfaced with her, and submerged her again. Staff threw food into the water. They banged buckets. They gave hand and voice commands. Nothing worked. Kelty came to the surface screaming, reached the edge, tried to pull herself out, and was pulled back. She came up one more time, and then she didn't. Her body was recovered several hours later with a large net. The coroner's cause of death? Drowning due to forced submersion by killer whales. Kelty Byrne was 20 years old. Sealand of the Pacific never recovered. It closed within the year. Its 3 orcas were put up for sale. SeaWorld wanted Tilikum, not despite what had happened, alongside it. He was a large, healthy, reproductively capable adult male orca. SeaWorld's breeding program needed his genetics. The fact that he had been involved in a human death was documented. It was known. SeaWorld acquired him anyway, transported him by cargo plane to Orlando in January 1992, and installed him as the centerpiece of their captive breeding operation. During his time at SeaWorld, Tilikum sired 21 calves. His genetic material has been used across the captive orca population worldwide. His integration into SeaWorld's show program was governed by specific protocols. Trainers could not enter the water with him because of his known history. He performed from a distance. He was handled differently from the other animals. The protocols existed because SeaWorld knew who they had bought. In July 1999, a 27-year-old man named Daniel Dukes visited SeaWorld as a paying guest, hid in the park until after closing, evaded overnight security, and entered Tilikum's pool. His body was found the next morning, draped across Tilikum's back. SeaWorld's public statement said none of the cameras monitoring the orca pools had captured what happened. The coroner found scrapes and bruises across the entire body, puncture wounds on the leg. His genitals had been ripped open. Divers found small pieces of him at the bottom of the pool. The park opened the next morning. In 2006, senior trainer Kenneth Peters was performing with orca Kasatka during a live show at SeaWorld San Diego when the whale grabbed his foot and repeatedly dragged him to the bottom of the pool. For several minutes, in front of a live audience, on camera, Peters used every operant conditioning tool he had been trained to use. Kasatka continued to hold him. He came out with a broken foot. The footage became public. OSHA investigated. In 2007, OSHA produced a report. It was specific. It stated in plain language, the continuing factors to the incident, in the simplest of terms, is that swimming with captive orcas is inherently dangerous. And if someone hasn't been killed already, it is only a matter of time before it does happen. SeaWorld challenged the report. OSHA agreed to withdraw it. The report, the one that said exactly what was coming, was removed from the record. SeaWorld's own internal incident logs, later entered into court proceedings, documented more than 100 separate occasions on which orcas had bitten trainers, dragged them underwater, pinned them against pool walls, charged them, or held them beneath the surface. 600 pages. None of it changed the show. Dawn Brancho had wanted this job since a family vacation to Orlando when she was a child. She had looked at the Shamu show from the stands and decided that was where she was going. She spent 2 years working with dolphins in New Jersey, joined SeaWorld Orlando in 1994, and spent the next 15 years working her way to become the park's most recognizable trainer. Her face was on the billboards outside the park. She led the 2-year revamp of the Shamu show. She ran marathons. She had 2 chocolate Labradors and kept ducks and chickens outside the city. Her husband, Scott, was a SeaWorld stunt water skier. She had acknowledged in multiple interviews that the job involved danger. She understood these animals in a way very few people did. 15 years of understanding. On February 24, 2010, 2 months and 4 days after a SeaWorld-owned orca killed trainer Alexis Martinez at Loro Parque in Tenerife, Spain, Dawn was working a post-show routine with Tilikum at a Dine with Shamu event. Guests were still at the poolside restaurant when it happened. She was lying beside him at the slide-out, the sloped platform at the pool's edge, when Tilikum grabbed her. What followed was witnessed by multiple audience members and captured on SeaWorld's own cameras. A Florida law passed in 2011, partly in direct response to the circumstances of Dawn's death, sealed that footage by making recordings of human deaths held by public agencies confidential. She was scalped. One of her arms was bitten off. Most of her bones were fractured. She died from a combination of drowning and traumatic injuries. Staff tried to lure Tilikum away with food, tried netting, tried herding. He would not release her. He was the third person he had killed. OSHA fined SeaWorld $75,000. SeaWorld called the findings unfounded. The subsequent legal proceedings forced SeaWorld's own internal documentation into the public record. The 600 pages of incident reports, the prior attacks, the 2007 report they had successfully suppressed. A federal judge found it implausible and difficult to reconcile that SeaWorld had been unaware of the hazards. The violation was downgraded. The fine was reduced to $12,000. Dawn Brancho's family, in a statement after the documentary Blackfish was released, said, "Dawn would not have remained a trainer at SeaWorld for 15 years if she felt that the whales were not well cared for." And then, a human life was lost that day. It feels as though some believe her death was just a footnote. They were right to say it. Tilikum died on January 6, 2017, from bacterial pneumonia. He was approximately 36 years old. In September 2024, a trainer at SeaWorld Orlando was injured during a desensitization training exercise with a killer whale. OSHA issued a citation. SeaWorld is contesting it. The 3 people Tilikum killed were Kelty Byrne, who was 20 and wanted to work with animals; Daniel Dukes, who was 27 and whose death was documented by a coroner in terms SeaWorld never publicly acknowledged; and Dawn Brancho, who was 40 years old and had spent 15 years learning to read an animal that killed her anyway. SeaWorld knew his history in 1992. They built a commercial operation around it for 30 years. You're watching Abandoned Thrills, where every story has a paper trail. If you're on your TV right now and want more investigations like this one, search Abandoned Thrills on YouTube. Subscribe so you're there when the next one drops. The Pittsburgh Zoo's Safety Committee first flagged the African painted dog exhibit in August 2006. The exhibit had been open for 2 months. The minutes from that meeting read, "Wild dog exhibit has one side of the exhibit that is open, and a visitor was seen dangling a child over the exhibit through the opening." That was the first record. There were 4 more before the year was out. By May 2007, the minutes recorded, "Guests are dangling children over the rail at the wild dog exhibit." The observation deck had a 4-foot wooden railing. Below the railing was a safety net, designed, the zoo would later acknowledge, to catch dropped objects like phones and sunglasses, not to bear the weight of a child. Below the net, 11 feet down, was the enclosure. The zoo's own employee, Lou Neen, told KDKA television that he watched parents lift children above the railing to see the dogs at least 10 times a day. Frank Pizzi, the zoo's curator of horticulture, went further. He formally raised his concerns with management about the specific danger of children falling into the exhibit. He was told, "This is not your concern. Go back to work." 6 years passed. The exhibit did not change. Maddox Durkosh was 2 years old. He had been born with a vision impairment and wore glasses. The reason his mother Elizabeth lifted him that morning was to help him see better. He loved construction trucks and tractors. He was, by every account from the people who knew him, an energetic, curious, joyful child. His family had been attending a zoo school conservation class that morning. Afterwards, they walked through the exhibits. They reached the painted dog enclosure. Elizabeth Durkosh lifted Maddox above the 4-foot railing so he could see the dogs clearly. He lurched forward. He fell through the gap above the railing, hit the safety net, which did not hold his weight, bounced, and tumbled 11 feet into the enclosure below. The 11 African painted dogs in the exhibit responded immediately. Zoo staff were on the scene within seconds. 7 dogs were lured away. Tranquilizer darts were fired. One of the dogs was shot and killed by a police officer when it would not retreat. Elizabeth Durkosh screamed and attempted to climb into the enclosure herself. She was physically restrained by other visitors. It was too late before it had started. By the time zoo veterinarian Barbara Baker arrived, she made the assessment. It was clear the child was dead. There was no reason to send our staff into harm's way. The autopsy confirmed Maddox did not die from the fall. He died from blood loss due to the mauling. More than 46 wounds to his head and neck. His internal organs had been torn apart. The zoo's response was to blame Elizabeth Durkosh. Their legal filing argued she had been reckless and negligent in deliberately lifting her son up atop the railing. The zoo claimed it cannot control all of the conduct of its patrons while they are on zoo premises. The same zoo whose safety committee had 5 years of meeting minutes recording exactly this behavior. Parents lifting children at exactly this exhibit, at this railing above this gap, into which a child could fall. The same zoo whose employee had warned management directly and been told to go back to work. The Durkosh family filed a wrongful death lawsuit. Their attorney entered those safety committee minutes into the court record. The zoo's counterclaim that the exhibit continuously exceeded the safety requirements was entered alongside documentation that their own employees had watched parents hold children over the opening daily for 6 years. The case settled for undisclosed terms. The observation deck was removed within a month of Maddox's death. The exhibit was permanently closed and replaced with a cheetah habitat. The dogs were relocated to other zoos. There is a footnote the zoo did not advertise. In the spring of 2012, 7 months before Maddox died, 9 of the 11 African painted dogs had escaped a section of their enclosure and wandered the zoo property. Nobody was injured. The exhibit passed its next inspection. Maddox Durkosh was 2 years old. He had poor eyesight and wanted to see the dogs. His mother held him up so he could. The zoo had been watching this happen for 6 years. Rosa King had worked at Hamilton Zoo Park since leaving college. Animals were not a career choice for her. They were, by every account from the people who knew her, simply what she was. Her parents described a daughter who had been drawn to animals from early childhood, who had pursued that instinct without detour, and who arrived at Hamilton immediately after her education because it was where she wanted to be. She was 33 years old and the zoo's senior carnivore keeper. She had worked with big cats for years. She knew the protocols. She knew the animals. On the morning of May 29, 2017, She entered the enclosure of Cheatsip, a rare male Malayan tiger, to clean the public viewing windows before the zoo opened for the day. Her body was found at approximately 11 in the morning by a zoo visitor who looked into the enclosure from the public viewing area. Nobody saw the attack happen. Nobody saw what Rosa did in the immediate lead-up. What investigators found inside the enclosure was a wet cloth, a squeegee, an upturned bucket, a set of keys, a large bloodstain on the ground, and a blood-stained paw print near the keeper's gate. The inquest into Rosa's death heard a precise account of how the entry and exclusion system worked, or was supposed to work. The system's entire function rested on one principle. Before a keeper entered Cheatsip's enclosure, they were required to confirm the tiger was excluded and all gates were secured. There was one sliding gate through which Cheatsip could access the run where Rosa would be working. Confirming it was closed was the single safety step between a keeper and the animal. There was no secondary lock, no automatic indicator, no technological failsafe. The system required a human being to perform one action correctly every single time, without exception, with no backup if they didn't. The coroner, Nicholas Moss, described it this way: "The safety of every keeper who entered that enclosure relied entirely on that keeper following training with no automatic or technological failsafe." He continued, "The gate was found open. Cheatsip had not been confirmed as excluded. Rosa had entered the run. Cheatsip had walked through the open gate." The attack lasted between approximately 9:38 and 10:45 in the morning. For more than an hour, while Hamerton Zoo was opening to the public, a Malayan tiger was in an enclosure with a keeper who had died, separated from the public by a single gate that staff rushed to close when the alarm was raised. The coroner's inquest concluded Rosa's death was accidental, not criminal, accidental. But the coroner also noted, formally in a legal document, was that it was by luck and chance that Cheatsip had not walked out of that enclosure into the zoo grounds where families were already present. And then he noted something else. Hamerton Zoo Park did not have firearms. This is a legal requirement in the United Kingdom for any zoo keeping potentially dangerous animals, that weapons capable of killing the animal be available if it escapes. Hamerton had a dart gun. A dart gun requires 15 minutes for the drug to take effect. If Cheatsip had reached a public area, the only response available would have been to call for police firearms officers from a rural location. The coroner noted their response time may not have been quick enough to prevent further deaths. 2 years after Rosa died, when the coroner issued his formal Regulation 28 Prevention of Future Deaths report, a legal document sent to DEFRA, the Health and Safety Executive, and the local government association demanding systemic change, Hamerton Zoo had still not resolved its firearms licensing. Rosa King's death produced a Regulation 28 report. It produced a new airlock entry system with 2 gates instead of 1. It produced the firearms training that the zoo had been operating without when she died. She was 33 years old. She had worked at Hamerton since leaving college. She knew the protocols exactly, and the system had no backup for the moment when a protocol wasn't followed. The coroner praised the quiet dignity of her parents through the inquest. The Dallas Zoo had been cutting staff for months. The zoo was in financial difficulty. The nonprofit Dallas Zoological Society had recently proposed a county government takeover to stabilize its funding. Staff had been reduced. Maintenance had been postponed. The zoo was, by its own director's admission in the weeks before the incident, operating under financial constraints that had affected its operational capacity. Jabari was a 13-year-old western lowland gorilla, approximately 340 pounds, born in Toronto and transferred to Dallas in 1995. He lived in the Wilds of Africa exhibit, a 2-acre habitat surrounded by a 15 to 16-foot concave wall that zoo director Rich Bucharud described as among the best in the country. Shortly before 5 in the afternoon on March 18, 2004, a group of teenagers was reported near the gorilla enclosure. Witnesses said they had been taunting the animal. What happened next, exactly how Jabari got out, was never established. Zoo employees searched the following day for broken branches, footprints, physical evidence. They found nothing. "We're just beginning to wonder whether this is some kind of superhuman feat of physical prowess," Bucharud said. "We just can't believe it." Primatologists were less uncertain. One expert said flatly, "Virtually anybody who's worked with great apes has not been able to compute any way that a gorilla could get up a 15-foot wall. When you boil it all down, at some level, one has to assume human error." Jabari was loose inside the zoo for approximately 40 minutes. He attacked 4 people. He bit a 3-year-old boy, Rivers Noah, on the chest and head. He grabbed a 26-year-old woman, his jaws around her arm. He mauled a 3rd victim. He entered the zoo's aviary and snatched another woman who had been shielding children. Approximately 300 visitors were evacuated. Some hid in a restaurant, others in the monorail. Zoo staff pursued Jabari through the thick bamboo of the jungle exhibit for 40 minutes with tranquilizer guns, but could not get a clear shot. Armed Dallas police officers eventually confronted the gorilla on a nature trail. He was holding a pair of white children's sandals when he charged them. They shot him dead at 15 feet. The investigation produced no definitive answer about the escape. Federal regulators from the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service reviewed whether the zoo had been in compliance with the Animal Welfare Act. No charges were filed. The zoo's enclosure was reviewed. What the investigation produced more clearly was a portrait of the context. Financial difficulty, staff reductions, maintenance postponed. A wall that experts said, after the escape, could not have been scaled by a gorilla unaided. And a zoo that 2 years later, when the zoo had stabilized under county management, would acknowledge that what happened with Jabari had prompted significant safety reviews. Bucharud's description of the habitat as among the best in the country was the honest belief of a zoo director who had never seen his best exhibit fail. His statement after the incident, "This blows our minds," was almost certainly true. But "this blows our minds" and "we had no warning" are different things. The zoo knew it was in financial difficulty. It knew maintenance had been deferred. It knew staff had been cut. What it did not have, and what the investigation ultimately could not provide, was an explanation of how a 15-foot concave wall failed on the day a gorilla was reported to have been provoked by visitors. That question was never answered. It remains unanswered. Rivers Noah, the 3-year-old who was bitten, was treated at Children's Medical Center and recovered. All 4 victims survived. Jabari did not survive. He was 13 years old and had spent 9 of those years at the Dallas Zoo. The history of South Lakes Wild Animal Park is the history of one man's management decisions and their accumulated consequences. David Gill opened South Lakes in 1994 on converted farmland in Cumbria. Within 3 years, the park had its first documented major incident. A 3-ton white rhinoceros escaped its pen. Gill shot it dead in an adjacent field. He was fined 10,000 pounds for failing to keep the animal adequately enclosed. By 2006, inspectors were documenting lemur and coyote escapes. Health and safety improvement notices had been issued and filed. The pattern, animals getting out, inadequate enclosures, regulatory citations, the zoo continuing to operate, was in the record before Sarah McClay started work there. Sarah McClay was 24 years old, from Barrow and Furnace, a few miles from the zoo. She had visited South Lakes as a child. Working there, according to her mother Fiona, had been her dream job. On May 24, 2013, during morning cleaning and feeding duties, Sarah entered the tiger enclosure. The male Sumatran tiger, Padang, should not have been able to access the corridor where she was working. The sliding bolt on the door between the animal's den and the keeper's corridor was defective. The door was not locked. Padang walked through it. When colleagues rushed in after the attack, they found the door to the den open. 2 internal sliding gates were also open, allowing Padang and his female companion to move between enclosures. The defective bolt on the door that should have separated Sarah from Padang was confirmed by a council environmental officer during the subsequent investigation. The inquest into Sarah's death delivered what is called a narrative verdict, a finding that she had entered the enclosure, but that it was not possible to determine precisely how the sequence of events unfolded. She died at Royal Preston Hospital the same day. David Gill's initial public response appeared to blame Sarah for the incident. Her boyfriend, David Shaw, later said, "It's a shame it took this long to come to what was a fairly obvious conclusion." The Crown prosecution's case focused on the corporate entity, South Lakes Safari Zoo Limited, rather than Gill personally. In June 2016, the zoo pleaded guilty to 2 breaches of the Health and Safety at Work Act, failing to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of employees, including Sarah McClay, and failing to ensure that persons not in its employment were not exposed to risk. Gill was personally acquitted of the individual charges. South Lakes Safari Zoo was fined £450,000. Sarah McClay's death was the most high-profile incident in a pattern that had been documented since the park's opening year. 1997, rhino escaped, shot dead, £10,000 fine. 2006, lemur and coyote escapes, HSE improvement notices. 2013, Sarah McClay killed by a tiger through a door with a defective bolt. 2014, another zookeeper fell from a ladder while feeding big cats. The zoo pleaded guilty to a second health and safety breach. 2015, a flock of sacred ibis escaped in 2 separate incidents. Birds were shot. Gill was personally convicted of 3 wildlife offenses. This conviction contributed to the decision not to renew his operating license. 2017, Gill lost his license. The zoo was taken over by a new operator. 2024, South Lakes Safari Zoo closed permanently. The £450,000 fine represented the institutional consequence for the death of a 24-year-old woman who had wanted to work at this zoo since she was a child. The zoo that fined her employer had been issuing improvement notices to it for years. Sarah's mother, Fiona, said working at South Lakes had been her daughter's dream. The bolt on the door that separated her from the tiger was defective. The record of what that institution had been doing and not doing since 1997 was in the files. 6 zoos, 6 animals, 6 moments when the barrier that was supposed to hold did not. In San Francisco, a tiger enclosure wall had been 4 feet shorter than the minimum recommended standard since 1940. The animal had already attacked a keeper through the feeding grill 1 year before. She killed a visitor on Christmas Day. After she escaped, the zoo raised the wall. They did not raise it before. In Orlando, a killer whale had drowned a trainer in front of witnesses in 1991, and an institution purchased him anyway because his genetics were commercially valuable. Their own internal logs documented more than 100 subsequent incidents. An OSHA report in 2007 said in plain language that a death was coming. SeaWorld challenged it. OSHA withdrew it. 3 years later, Dawn Brancheau died. The fine for her death was $12,000. In Pittsburgh, a zoo safety committee spent 5 years recording that parents were lifting children over the railing at a wild dog exhibit through which a child could fall. One of their own employees formally warned management. He was told to go back to work. Maddox Durkosh was 2 years old. In Cambridgeshire, a zoo kept a Malayan tiger in an enclosure accessible through a single gate with no technological failsafe, no secondary lock, and, contrary to United Kingdom law, no firearms capable of killing the animal if it escaped. Rosa King had been working there since leaving college. She knew the protocols. The system had no backup for the day a protocol wasn't followed. In Dallas, a zoo operating under financial difficulty with deferred maintenance and reduced staff watched a gorilla escape an enclosure in a way that 40 minutes of searching afterwards could not explain. Nobody was killed. The investigation produced no answer. In Cumbria, a zoo that had been cited for inadequate enclosures since 1997 sent a 24-year-old keeper into a corridor separated from a tiger by a door with a defective bolt. The bolt was confirmed defective after she died. The zoo had been receiving improvement notices for years before she arrived. In San Francisco, after the wall was raised to 19 feet, no tiger has escaped. In Pittsburgh, after the observation deck was removed, no child has fallen. At SeaWorld, after trainers were finally banned from the water with orcas, no trainer has been killed in a performance. The changes that came after each of these incidents were real. In every case, someone had to die first. In September 2024, a trainer at SeaWorld Orlando was injured during a close contact training session with a killer whale. OSHA issued a citation. SeaWorld is contesting it. This has been Abandoned Thrills, where we document the accidents that changed everything. Comment which story shocked you the most, and subscribe so you're there when the next one drops.